Political Poison, Book 2, Paul Turner Mystery. Author, Mark Richard Zubro, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 7. The next morning, Paul asked Jeff about his homework. Ben helped me, Jeff said. He knows a lot of math. Ben, taking Brian's place at cooking breakfast, added, he just wanted to get his homework done so he could beat me at his Nintendo games. Jeff said, he's better than you are, Dad. He almost beat me once. Paul congratulated his younger son on his wizardry at electronic games as the front door banged open and Brian bounced into the room. He said breezy hellos to everybody, grabbed some toast and milk, and started wolfing them down. How do you manage to be so energetic in the morning? Ben asked. Big plans today. People to see. Baseball practice. He paused between gulps of milk. He looked at his dad. Unless you're going to work and need help with Jeff. Paul hated to interfere with Brian's schedule on short notice. His older son gave up huge amounts of his time to take care of his brother, and this was a sacrifice because Brian was a popular athlete with a busy social life. He knew Brian would do it, but one of Paul's unwritten rules was to make sure both boys had their lives impeded as little as possible because of the help Jeff needed. Also, it was Paul's problem that he had to go into work, not Brian's. I'll have to check with Mrs. Tolucci. Somebody will have to watch Jeff. Jeff can come to the shop if he wants, Ben offered. He'd be in the way. No, I wouldn't, Dad. It would be cool. If Myra's there, she might let me help. She did last time. You shouldn't bother people at the shop, Paul said. It wasn't a bother, Ben said. He and Myra like each other. She told me she was a lesbian, Dad. That's just like you and Ben, only with women. Paul patted his son's head. At least you learned something. So can I go, Dad, please? I'll have to check with Mrs. Tolucci. That way, if you change your mind or get tired, you'll have a place to go. How's the case going, Dad? Brian asked. Paul shook his head. I'll be at work all day and probably half the night. I'm afraid I won't be able to make Jeff's game. Jeff had recently joined a wheelchair basketball league. He wasn't very good yet, but the coach made sure all the kids on the team played for at least 4 or 5 minutes. Paul had been to all of the games so far and even stopped in at some of the practices. I'll give it my best shot. I can pick up Jeff at Ben's and drive him to the game, Brian said. Paul told Brian he could use the van since he'd be taking Jeff. Paul would use Brian's car for transportation. Pick you up at 5, Squirt. Brian tousled his brother's hair. Seconds later, they heard the thud of his feet on the stairs up to his room. Paul checked with Mrs. Tolucci. If Jeff got bored or in the way, she would take care of him. Mrs. Tolucci smiled when Paul said Ben would take Jeff to work with him. Paul also thanked Mrs. Tolucci for getting him to talk to Pirelli. How could you be involved with such a notorious guy? Paul asked. Notorious? As far as I'm concerned, he's still running from me as I chased him down Taylor Street 80 years ago. Tried to steal a kiss in the park. Needs a good slap upside the head. Married Maria Brosny. She knew how to keep him in line. He did his political nonsense and kept out of her way, but she died. Mrs. Tolucci paused. I did help him with the children. Maria was my best friend when we were growing up. Did he really introduce you to Frank? Paul asked. Oh, yes, but I'll save that story for some time when I'm old and have nothing else to talk about. As he began to leave, she added, Be careful with Giovanni Pirelli. I trust him only so far. I raised his children, but still, I know he's a crook. He will look out for himself. Be careful. Turner thanked her for the warning and left. Paul called Ian before he left for Area 10. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning, earlier than he would normally call his friend. Ian swore angrily until he realized it was Turner. Then he just grumbled and complained. Turner said he would pick him up in 15 minutes. Ian squawked protest, but Turner told him he wanted to talk about political conspiracies and Giovanni Pirelli. Pirelli doesn't exist. He's a figment of the conspiracy theorists, Ian said. I met him last night, Turner said. He hung up on Ian's exclamations of disbelief. Turner picked the reporter up at Clark and Diversey and drove to the Breakfast Club on Hubbard Street. Ian wore a long-sleeved sweatshirt that said, "No one knows I'm a shit," light blue jeans and gym shoes with no socks. He kept his slouch fedora pulled well over his eyes. "Disturbing my Saturday morning beauty sleep is a serious crime," Ian said. "No one knows better than I how much beauty sleep you really need," Turner said. "You are forgiven for that crack only because you claim you met Giovanni Pirelli." "Not a claim," Turner said. "I did." "Any reporter in the city would give his left nut for an interview with the guy," Ian said. "All the reporters in the city are male," Turner asked. "The woman would give their left tit. How the hell do you manage to get close to him?" "Mrs. Tolucci," Turner said. "Old Rose is a gangster?" "I always wondered what her connection was. She's a sly old devil." "She always liked you," Turner said. "She's also perceptive and wise. Now what the hell is going on?" Turner told Ian what had happened. Turner knew that he could trust his friend to keep a confidence, even though Ian was a reporter. Plus, he needed information. After Turner finished, Ian said, "You could talk to Mary Ann Elliott again." "I'm not sure I want to trust any politician in this city. She's probably okay, but I'd rather not at the moment. And think about it. None of her leads has given us much of anything. If it wasn't for Rose, I wouldn't be this far." They arrived at the restaurant, which was in a converted home 2 blocks east of Ashland Avenue on Hubbard Street, just a block or so from the Northwestern Railroad tracks. They were lucky. It wasn't crowded, and they were seated immediately. After they ordered, Ian said, "You know, this whole conspiracy to undermine the reformers that Pirelli outlined as a certain sublime elegance. But Giles couldn't have been the only one in the group who knew about it. He had to have trained the people who went to these groups to undermine them. They would be able to turn on him. How could he trust people who just showed up as volunteers?" "The volunteers," Turner said, "could go to as many different groups they wanted. The key was that one person from the Democratic organization went to the various group meetings. That person would be trained from downtown. No need to trust amateurs who walked in off the street." "The conspirators weren't volunteers?" Ian asked. "Nope. They showed up as if they were volunteers. No one else in Giles' organization had to know." Turner said, "You believe what Pirelli told me?" "Hell of a question to ask me. I wasn't there." "Could it be true? You know these liberal reformed organizations better than I do. Could somebody have been undermining them all these years?" "I'm not sure," Ian said. "It was easy to believe last night," Turner said. "It was spooky being in the house. I almost expected corpses to stick out of the woodwork. That it looked so ordinary made it even creepier." "Everybody lies," Ian mused. "So what part of it would Pirelli have been lying about?" As a former cop, he too had suspicions about what people told him. They talked over all the ramifications of what Pirelli had said as they finished their meal and had coffee and blueberry scones for dessert. Ian swallowed a last bite, brushed his fingers off, and said, "I think you're in danger. I think Giles had people in most organizations, and I think the whole thing is totally screwed up. Can't see how you're going to find the murderer. What do you want me to do to help?" "Your connections in some of the do-good organizations. See if you can't talk to a few of them. Find the kind of person Pirelli described. An obstructionist. I'd like to talk to at least one of them." "I know the heads of lots of these groups," I said. "I'll find out what I can. See what you can uncover, but be careful. I don't want you in danger." Ian pushed his hat back and revealed dark red hair. Turner knew he only took the slouch fedora off to go to bed. Ian said, "I could take care of myself even before I was a cop." Turner drove to Area 10 headquarters. It was just 11. Fenwick drove up while Turner was walking from the parking lot to the door. He waited for his friend, and they strode in together. They checked with the commander and the case sergeant to see if any new leads had come up before they'd gotten in. Nothing had. Turner gave Fenwick all the details about his meeting with Pirelli. They discussed it and agreed they'd have to wait to hear from the old man. They would try to develop their own leads with the politicians. Only if the old man didn't come through, or if he delayed and they thought he was playing games. After working an hour, they got a call from John Chester, the bar owner. told them he hadn't been able to find out anything. For 2 more hours, they plowed through paperwork over a cup of coffee and a donut, their first break all afternoon. Fenwick said, "Okay, this political bullshit might lead somewhere, but what about this university people? I've been going through all the interviews with the minor office workers, peripheral people, and I get a sense that all was not good between Giles and the rest of the faculty. When you and I talk to them, they seem to be talking about only the usual petty jealousies any faculty would have. Being around those academic shits probably warped your mind. I'm suspicious, and I'm not convinced, and I don't like those academic shits. I want to look at them. I need to see their faces, watch them squirm. These notes don't do shit." "Who's going to be around on a Saturday?" Turner asked. Fenwick licked the remnants of several donuts off his fingers and plunged through his pile of paperwork. He emerged with a list of addresses along with a cover letter, glanced at it and said, "It says here that lots of them hang around the Quadrangle Club, plus lots of these folks live in Hyde Park. Let's go visiting." In the car, Turner looked through the list of names. Giles' regular secretary at the university is supposed to be back from vacation today. He found her address. "Let's try her first. Which one was she?" "Gwendolyn Harleth." Turner hunted through a pile of forms, found the one he wanted. A Blessing checked her out. She was legitimately on vacation. Been planned for months. "Maybe the killer knew that," Fenwick offered. "Maybe," Turner said. "She should have lots of background on all the university people." He gave Fenwick the address on East Madison Park. Madison Park lies between Dorchester and Woodland Avenues, in Hyde Park between 51st and 50th Streets. On each end of the 3-block stretch are iron fences and signs that say "Private." It is one of 123 private streets listed in the Chicago Street Guide. Residents pay for all the upkeep. The one-way road winds through an urban sanctuary of trees, shrubbery, and grass. The street is lined with homes and luxury apartment buildings. They pulled up in front of what was perhaps the most modest of the homes. A dark blue Dodge van sat in the driveway. The sliding doors were open on the sides. Bags of groceries waited to be lugged into the house. A woman emerged from inside and strode down the driveway to them. She smiled at the cops uncertainly. They showed her their identification. She was 5'2", wearing a tan warm-up suit with a hooded sweatshirt. Her graying hair lay flat against the sides of her head. Turner guessed her to be in her late 50s. "I heard while I was on vacation," she said. "One of the secretaries had my itinerary." "We need to ask you some questions," Turner said. She nodded. The cops each grabbed a sack of groceries and carried them in for her. They talked in the kitchen while she put away groceries. A sunroom that faced west led directly off the kitchen. Bright light streamed through all the windows and lit up a jungle of green plants. Turner and Fenwick sat at the kitchen table as she stored her supplies. Turner noted she did so carefully, placing each item just so. Turner asked, "How long were you Gideon Giles' secretary?" "Since I started at the university 8 years ago." "Tell us about him," Turner said. She paused with the refrigerator door open and looked at them. Turner saw tears in her eyes. "He was a good boss, according to his lights. I had to set him straight a few times. I'll never forget the first day when I told him I wouldn't make or fetch his coffee. His mouth gaped open in the most amusing way." "You must have been pretty confident to say something like that the first day," Fenwick said. "No," she said. "I just know what I will or won't do, and I've been around the university long enough to know what was tolerated. He took it well. We had a good relationship. He tried to get me to do some of his political work, but I refused. Told him I was his secretary at the university, and I would do anything for him I could, but I wouldn't get involved in his politics." "You didn't know any of the politicians?" Fenwick asked. She folded the paper bags and placed them in a rack next to the refrigerator. She sat with them at the table. She said, "I recognized some of the names he had appointments with, and some of the people who came in looked familiar from pictures in the newspapers. But it wasn't my business and wasn't my job, so I didn't pay much attention. I looked in his appointment book, Turner said. He had only one meeting Monday and another Tuesday. That sounds right. I kept a schedule for him. He could have had more political things to do, but if he did, someone from the campaign would call. But I don't remember anything else. What was on the calendar should have been it. How did he get along with other people in the university? Turner asked. She sighed. How much do you know about university people? She asked. They shrugged. Turner said, Not much. Harleth explained that her husband had been a professor at the university. She hadn't had a degree and didn't want to get one, but they were in love and had gotten married. The other professors' wives, especially the ones with degrees, sneered and looked down on her. It's a catty, competitive world among the professors and among their husbands or wives, she said. But she and her husband had been secure in their love. He died 10 years ago. She'd worked as a secretary for many years for a law firm in the Loop. But after her husband's death, she had been devastated. She hadn't worked for a year after. They'd invested wisely and saved so she didn't have to work. But she wanted a few luxuries, and she wanted to keep busy. She'd seen an opening at the university, applied, and gotten it. University people tend to live in a closed society, she said. Lots of ambition and infighting. You listen closely to a lot of their conversations. It's nothing but put-downs of each other. Sometimes somebody says something genuinely funny, but usually it's hurtful stuff. Like what? Turner said. When my husband was alive, I'd go to parties with him. Most of the time, I'd sit quietly and listen. It was incredible. They'd snipe at each other about who got reviewed and who didn't, and what the review said. They'd maneuver to get appointed to committees or fight about who was closer to the chairman of the department, who was or wasn't going to get tenure. Men, women, they were all vicious about it. When I came to work, it was the same thing. How did Giles fit into that? Fenwick asked. She told them she'd known Giles slightly while her husband was alive. He seemed pretty much like the rest until this political business started. What happened then? Turner asked. It got much worse. A group of us faculty-wise would get together once a week for lunch. We'd gossip about what was going on. And then when I became a secretary, a bunch of us ate lunch every day. We used to laugh about how pompous and absurd they were. But the professors took it all very seriously. When Giles started his political career, a lot of the other professors didn't like it. That he got all that publicity in the press. Some of them complained that it brought down the dignity of the institution to have someone connected to the university involved in the gutter politics of the city. I think some of them were simply jealous. Didn't like it that he got on television. Was it the people in the English department who felt that way? Turner asked. I suspect most of them. The worst was the chairman, Atherton Sorensen. I think if he could have stopped Giles from getting tenure, he would have. Did they fight? Fenwick asked. No one at the University of Chicago fights, she said. They declare war. You may never see a shot fired, but they'll tear each other to pieces in 1,000 ways. If his chairman hated him, how'd he get tenure? Fenwick asked. Giles was alderman after the issue of tenure came up. Giles had the research and publications and connections at the university. I never heard that his getting tenure was a major problem, she smiled. We secretaries know a lot, but not everything. Who was his best friend on the faculty? Turner asked. She thought for a minute. I'm not sure you'd say he had friends on the faculty. Many of them went to the Quadrangle Club every day for lunch, and many of them vying to sit with the chairman, but Gideon never seemed to have one buddy. Certainly, I never heard of him going out with one of the members of the department for a drink. I don't know if they had a lot of dinner parties at his home. Did he have any enemies besides Atherton? Fenwick asked. No more or less than anybody else. Grudges, simmering feuds. Everyone else at the university described the department as a veritable Eden. You mentioned the head of the department, Sorensen. Anybody at all? What about Darcy Worthington and Otto Kemp, the two professors in the English department? She thought carefully. Two things stand out in my mind, but really I think they were nothing. Turner urged her to tell anyway. Well, as for Worthington, I'm sure it's really nothing. What was it? Fenwick urged. Well, when Giles started, he and Darcy were real close. She repeated much of the same story that Worthington had told Turner on Tuesday. At the end, she added, "They kind of acted like it was all made up, but I'm not sure I ever saw them together once. All the time I worked there. I don't know. Sometimes I thought some bad feelings remained." She could remember no concrete examples of this occurring. "What about Kemp?" Turner asked. "Really? It couldn't have been anything," she said. "Tell us anyway," Fenwick said. Kemp used to tease Giles about being friendly rivals. Now that I think about all the articles I typed for Giles, it seemed like they always happened to be writing about the same subject at the same time. I don't know if that's odd or not. Another thing, Kemp could tell 1,000 different jokes. At parties, he could always be counted on to entertain everybody with absolutely marvelous stories. He was probably the most liked person in the department. "How did he get along with Giles?" Turner said. "I always thought Gideon strained a bit to smile at the jokes and stories. Giles was the brunt of a few of the stories, but Kemp picked on everybody at the same time or another. It wasn't really noticeable. I can't see it as being a big thing." Turner asked her about Giles's and the health food drinks. "Is that what the poison was in?" she asked. Turner nodded. She gulped. "He always was bringing in these concoctions, each one more vile than the last. He constantly tried to get me to drink some. I know they were mostly vegetables and were good for me, but I couldn't barely stand the smell of them. He usually drank something healthful after lunch." "Who knew he did that?" Turner asked. "I don't know. I never gave it much thought myself." They spoke for a short while longer, but that was all she knew. "Let's go talk to Darcy Worthington," Fenwick said. Turner looked him up on his master list. Worthington lived in a high-rise on South Shore Drive, a block in from Lake Shore Drive. The security guard told them Worthington wasn't home. They decided to try the Quadrangle Club to see if any of the people from the English department might be hanging around that popular establishment. "What bugs me," Fenwick said, "is how the killer did it. That had to be an incredible chance to walk in there and poison him. We've asked everybody about his eating habits. Everybody knew some version of the fact that he ate health foods. A few people thought he might have eaten things at regular intervals, but nobody knew for sure. Killer could have brought it in and walked off." "Hell of a nerve," Fenwick said. "So it could have been anybody at any time during the day after he bought his ingredients. You'd think somebody would have seen a stranger. Don't forget, no one even saw Giles return from lunch, and nicotine can take a while to work, especially if Giles took it on a full stomach. He ate lunch sometime in that hour before he died. Killer walks in, pours poison in his juice, and leaves. Could have been somebody from politics," Fenwick said. "But my bet is on somebody from the university. It would have been so much easier." "Maybe the killer is counting on us to think that," Turner said. At the Quadrangle Club, they spotted Darcy Worthington, taking advantage of the pleasantly cool spring day out on the tennis courts. Turner and Fenwick walked onto the playing surface. When Worthington noticed them at the edge of the court, he threw them a sneer and tried to ignore them. His opponent looked to be the age of a graduate student. Both wore warm-up suits. Worthington had a sweater tied around his waist. Fenwick stalked to the middle of the net, and the game stopped. Worthington snarled, walked over to his gym bag, and grabbed a towel out of the top. "What are you doing here?" Worthington asked. "We need to ask you a few questions," Fenwick said. The student walked over. Worthington thanked him for the game and told him see him next week. "You lied Tuesday," Turner said. Worthington glared at him. He untied his sweater from around his waist and pulled it over his head. "I resent that remark," Worthington said. "Tough shit," Fenwick said. Worthington glanced around the tennis court. No one else was out in the early spring coolness. "You can't talk to me that way," Worthington said. Fenwick laughed. "Sure I can. I just did." He moved closer to Worthington and lowered his voice. "I can do just about anything I want." "I won't put up with police brutality. You won't do anything here in such a public place." You could see the tennis courts from numerous windows. "I don't have to do it here," Fenwick said. We could take a trip down to the station and bust up some of that arrogance. I knew the Chicago police were just thugs, Worthington said. He began to move away from them. Fenwick placed his bulk in front of him. This is a murder investigation, you stupid shit. We don't put up with lies from anybody. We want some truth, and we'll take it here or down at the station. You make the choice. Worthington looked at Turner. You can't do this, the professor said. Turner said, what really happened between you and Gideon Giles when you had your falling out? Worthington looked from one cop to the other. You can't, he began. I won't. Beads of sweat shone on his upper lip and forehead. Fenwick put his nose an inch from Worthington's. The cop said, you need to never tell me what I can or can't do. Right now, I'm a cop who wants answers, and I better hear some real soon, and I better like what I hear. Turner said, come on, Darcy, just tell us what happened. Worthington mopped at the sweat on his face. Okay, he mumbled, but not here. They trekked to his office on the third floor of Swift Hall. The building was open, and he didn't need to use his key to enter. The halls on this Saturday were deserted and quiet in Worthington's office. Turner noted the hundreds of books crammed into shelves that filled three of the walls. Worthington tossed his gym bag in a corner and sat behind a paper-strewn desk. I didn't kill him, he said. What happened, Darcy? Turner asked. Why'd you guys fight? Worthington used the edge of a paper-back book to clean under his nails. He fiddled with the collar of his warm-up suit. Finally, he gazed at Turner for several minutes before telling his story. Worthington and Giles had hit it off on the first day they joined the faculty. As the only two new people in the department that year, they found themselves thrown together, sharing experiences. We'd go out together, drinking buddies. We'd meet with students, talk for hours, work out, go running along the lakefront. We'd get together with our wives and spend hours talking and laughing. We even took a few vacations with them. Those were the best days of my life. He pushed his chair back and put his feet on the desk. In those days, I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to excite young minds, and kids here are bright. They don't need to be taught how to think. I thought I could change the world. I always figured Gideon Giles shared those dreams. All those talks we had. I don't know how I didn't notice. He paused. Notice what? Turner said. That Gideon Giles was the most self-centered, ambitious creep I had ever known. We got interested in local politics, even worked in a few campaigns together, but you could almost see it, like a horrible disease. It took him over completely. He does have a certain presence in front of crowds. People listened to him. As his ambitions grew, the less he had to do with me. I enjoyed liberal politics, especially when it got the goat of some of the staid old-timers around here. But it became a religion to Giles, all-consuming. He had no time for those of us who'd known him. He took his feet off the desk, placed his elbows on his knees, and clasped his hands. He looked up at the cops. So I confronted him, told him our friendship was more important to me than all this political power. He laughed at me. Worthington shook his head. That laugh told me more than anything he could have said. It wasn't cruel, more total indifference. He didn't care if I existed or not. He sighed deeply. That wasn't the end of it. I couldn't let it go. He'd been my friend, the guy I'd been closest to in my whole life. I demanded he talk to me. I told him what I saw, tried to remind him all the dreams we'd shared together. He turned vicious. No one witnessed this scene, so you see I'm being honest with you. We lost our tempers. We threatened each other. I made wild claims about how he'd be sorry. It was stupid, childish, but I was hurt. So you didn't just drift apart like you told us the other day, Fenwick said. Worthington shook his head. When did all this happen? Turner asked. Just after he was elected alderman, the first time. What happened after the confrontation? Turner asked. Nothing. It was in his office. I walked out. It was a Saturday. I remember like this, with no one around, so no one heard us afterwards. We were correct and polite with each other. We never did another thing together again. He sat up in the chair, and that was years ago. I had no reason to kill him. He was no threat to me. I had a secure job here. Did he ever have any other violent confrontations? Turner asked. Not with anyone at the university. I've thought about this a lot since Tuesday, trying to think who could have done it. and what motive they would have had. Your amateur sleuths and mysteries could get wound up in figuring out the motivation of the killer, but in actual fact, most of the time, detectives ignored motive. What was far more important was physical evidence, witnesses, and confessions. A detective was far more likely to solve a case by figuring out how the killer did it than why. Sometimes there wasn't a why. Worthington continued. The only thing I could come up with was the night Giles won the election for committeeman. We weren't friends anymore, but some of us from the university wanted to go see what it was like. On Giles's way up to the podium, this young woman stopped him. Remember now, the room was jammed. People shouting, laughing, band playing. But I saw the two of them clearly. She grabbed onto his arm and wouldn't let go. At first, I thought it was simply someone trying to get a favor. I couldn't hear them, but it was obvious she wasn't saying congratulations. She waved her fist at him. He tried to pull away from her. Finally, a couple of his campaign workers noticed and dragged the two of them apart. They escorted her to the door. Who was it? Turner asked. I asked around. Somebody finally told me it's the old committeeman's granddaughter, Molly McGee. They talked for a few more minutes. Fenwick and Turner decided to take one more look at the crime scene in case they might have missed something, so they hung back as Worthington started down the corridor. At the top of the stairs, he looked back. He was about 20 feet from them, his face in shadow. He called back. The person you should really talk to is Laura Giles. She really loved him. I can't believe the way he changed didn't affect her. They listened to his receding steps. Giles' office still had the police scene tape. Across it, the door was locked. They spent 15 minutes hunting for a security guard to open it for them. The woman who let them in seemed inclined to linger, but Fenwick asked her to leave. They'd find her when they were done so she could lock up. She left. Turner sat on the desk in Giles' office. He watched Fenwick prowl around the room. His partner inspected the refrigerator, now emptied of its contents, all safely tucked away at the evidence lab. Fenwick gazed out the window at the quadrangle, inspected the desk, opened all the drawers, got down on his hands and knees, and inspected the rug. Not much here, he said. Not much more the day of the murder, Turner said. Guards coming back, Fenwick said. Turner heard the soft footfalls. They both turned toward the door. A shadow appeared in the entryway to the outer office and stopped. What the fuck? Fenwick said. The barrel of a gun swung around the doorway. Turner dove for the floor. Shots rang out. Turner scraped the knuckles on his right hand, scrambling behind the desk. More shots thundered above him. Wood and plaster flew around the room. Gun out, he raised the barrel above the edge of the desktop and returned fire. Above the din, he could occasionally hear Fenwick bellowing, "Fuck, double fuck, and triple fuck." Turner emptied all 12 rounds toward the doorway. He yanked his gun back behind the desk to reload. Silence. "Buck?" Turner called. He heard grunts and the sound of clothing scraping against the floor. Buck's head appeared around the left side of the desk. "Are you okay?" Turner asked. "Not as good as I'm going to be when I get that bastard." They listened carefully, but didn't hear any sounds beyond their own breathing. Carefully, Turner raised an eyebrow and his gun over the edge of the desk. He heard Fenwick calling in their situation. Eventually, they decided it was safe enough to venture forth. They met their reinforcements at the head of the stairs. An hour and a half followed, filled with explanations on the spot paperwork and interviews with all the brass that showed up. The Area 10 commander arrived half an hour later. Turner and Fenwick walked out. The last thing the commander said to them was, "Find out what is behind all this. I don't care how many people you have to use. This is madness." Turner and Fenwick sat in the car. "I was scared," Fenwick said. "Me too," Turner said. They'd been friends many years. It didn't bother them to admit the truth to each other. They sat in silence for 15 minutes, enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. Finally, Fenwick shook his head. "I'm hungry." Turner looked at his watch. "Nearly 7. "It's Jeff's game," Fenwick said. "Yeah," Turner said. "He's got one tomorrow night. I've missed too many family things lately." "I know how it is," Fenwick said, and Turner knew that Fenwick did know how it was. and he was content with his partner's sympathy, but the feeling of absence from his boys gnawed at him. "I'm hungry," Fenwick repeated. "You can eat at a time like this?" Turner asked. "I've never had time exactly like this," Fenwick answered. "When I got shot in the butt 10 years ago, I was embarrassed and in pain. Now I'm hungry enough to eat the contents of a bakery early on a Sunday morning. The more cream-filled doughnuts, the better." They settled on Ann Sather's and 57th Street. "We got Kemp, Molly McGee, and Laura Giles to see," Fenwick said over his third dessert. "We'll have to roll you to the interviews," Turner said. "You should eat more chocolate," Fenwick said. "It's disgusting when a guy in his mid-30s hasn't started putting on excess weight." Turner wasn't up to debating metabolism. "It's Saturday night. I'm tired. Still a little shook, but I want to follow this up now." "We could get shot at again," Fenwick said. Turner said, "So we solved the case. Problem over." Fenwick gazed at him carefully and said, "No guts, no glory." They started at McGee's house at 8:30 Saturday night. Only a dim light shone from upstairs. "Getting colder," Fenwick said as he gave the door several more significant knocks. Turner watched. His breath formed steam. Someone switched on a light in the foyer. Brightness gleamed through the strips of stained glass windows on either side of the entrance. Molly McGee opened the door. "My grandfather's asleep," she told them. "We need to talk to you," Turner said. She looked confused, but let them in. She led them to the room they'd talked to her grandfather in. She sat in the chair her grandfather had been in several nights before. She wore loose blue jeans and a turquoise sweater. She curled one foot under. "What do you need?" she asked softly. The room seemed to call for near whispers. Turner responded quietly. "We understand you had words with Gideon Giles?" "Yes, years ago. So what? It's not a secret. Half the people in the ward saw me." "What was it about?" Turner asked. She shut her eyes and threw back her head. When she opened her eyes, Turner thought they were icy with hate. "I said to him that night that he was an unprincipled piece of dirt and that I hoped he died a horrible and lingering death. I didn't kill him," she said. "I didn't even see him that day when he came to talk to my grandfather." Fenwick spoke in his normal tone. It sounded like trumpets at an outhouse. "Anybody could have gotten into his office from Monday morning until Tuesday at noon and poisoned his drink. Can you account for all your time for those 24 hours? "No," she said, "but I'd bet most of the people in this city would have a tough time coming up with a minute-by-minute remembrance of any day." "Most of the people in the city didn't hate Gideon Giles the way you did," Fenwick said. "I didn't kill him," she said, "and neither did my grandfather, who did a great deal for this city and deserves to be left alone." The door to the library slowly swung open. A spectral figure hovered at the edge of the light. "Molly, what is this?" Mike McGee tottered toward them. He wore a silk bathrobe over pajama bottoms. His slippered feet felt their way across the carpet. Molly jumped up and rushed toward him. She led him to his chair. He gazed at the detectives. "Mr. Turner? Mr. Fenwick?" the old man said. "And why are you here?" McGee asked. Turner explained. "You think my Molly killed him because of what that sniveling, lying wise guy did to me?" "No. I would have done it myself. I hate him for far more than Molly possibly could. If you're looking for hatred as a motive, then I'm your man, not Molly." "I'm begging your pardon, sir," Turner said, "but we're looking for opportunity. With all due respect, you don't get around all that well. You couldn't have possibly snuck into the university and placed poison into Giles' drink. It needed someone quick and daring who could blend in with the other university students. Molly fits that." "But she wasn't seen there, was she?" McGee asked. "No," Turner admitted. "Found any of her fingerprints?" McGee asked. Fingerprints were mostly a mess," Turner admitted. "We have Giles's and lots of random others. We could try matching hers." Mike McGee tottered to his feet. He thrust a bony finger toward Turner. "How dare you, in my own home, accuse my granddaughter? How dare you? Get out!" His thin voice was high and raspy. Near the end, he could barely gasp the words out. Molly rushed to him, comforted him, held him. She glared at the detectives. Turner returned the gaze calmly. They all listened to Mike McGee recover his composure. Finally, Molly McGee took her grandfather's hand and said, "I'd be happy to be fingerprinted. Mine won't match any there. I haven't been in Giles' office." She looked at the cops spitefully. "They are accusing me, and I know I can prove them wrong." "I won't find her fingerprints," Fenwick said in the car. "Oh, she made a better suspect, but she's not really more likely than a lot of other people. We can't just start fingerprinting the entire Fifth Ward." Turner called into the station. He talked to the watch commander. No news. When he was done, he said to Fenwick, "It's 9:30. Late to go questioning," Turner said. "I don't give a fuck. If it's 4 in the morning, I want to talk to every single one of these shits." They drove to Kenwood Avenue and down to the Giles' home. Alex Hill, Giles' brother-in-law, answered the door. He held it open but didn't invite them in. "It's late," he said. "We're sorry," Turner said, "but we need to talk to Laura Giles." Hill led them through an entryway, still filled with winter coats on hooks. He opened another door to her living room. He asked them to sit. He would tell his sister they were here. The room had a black leather couch with 2 matching love seats, grouped around a glass-topped coffee table. One wall had a massive stereo system, silent now. The wall opposite the electronics had shelves filled with knickknacks and paperback books. Laura Giles entered. She wore a severe black dress and carried a box of pastel-colored tissues. She sat on the couch. Her brother started to sit next to her. "We'd like to talk to you alone, Mrs. Giles," Turner said. Hill glared at him, but Laura Giles put her hand on her brother's arm. She nodded at him. He left. Turner and Fenwick sat on either side of her on the love seats. Turner apologized for the lateness of the visit. She waved this away calmly. They asked if she'd remembered anything that might help them in their investigation, especially in terms of Giles' health food beverages, but she told them she hadn't thought of anything new. Fenwick asked, "We understand, Mrs. Giles, that your husband had changed over time, especially at the time he got involved in politics. Could you tell us about that?" "Changed?" She looked thoughtful for a minute. "I think some others saw him as this man who emerged from the quiet world of academia into the bright light of ambition and power." She gave them a brief smile. "I always knew he was ambitious and driven. He told me about his high school years. He was president of one thing or another, his class clubs. I think he loved the struggles at the university. The power games everybody tried to pretend didn't happen. It just wasn't enough for him." "Did he change towards you?" Turner asked. "I don't think so. Over time, we saw each other less, but we both had careers. I was always deeply involved in his campaigns. Someone told you that we didn't get along?" "When one person moves to a big new position, sometimes it's hard for the rest of the family to adjust," Fenwick said. "We had no children," Mrs. Giles said. "I had my career." They left a few minutes later. "Big nothing," Fenwick said in the car. "Where's Kemp live?" Kemp lived in the Beverly neighborhood, a block west of the corner of 111th Street and Longwood Drive. The exterior was English Tudor. Kemp greeted them in stocking feet, gray slacks, and a smoking jacket. Turner apologized for the lateness of the visit. Kemp pulled a pipe out of his mouth and invited them in. A long hallway with an antique oriental rug and a granite ledge led to a living room with carved wood sculptures of medieval monks. Above the fireplace, an antique Persian rug, ivory-colored sofas and silk and cotton, and soft peach walls. On the opposite wall from the fireplace, a stereo system softly played classical music. Kemp stopped at a pipe holder in the middle of the fireplace mantel, took out a pouch, refilled his pipe, and sat down. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked. He busied himself with tamping down his tobacco and lighting his pipe. "It was more than friendly rivalry with Giles, wasn't it?" Fenwick asked. Kemp stopped, waving out a match, and glared at him. A second later he said, "Ouch," and flung the still glowing remnant into the fireplace. "I don't know what you mean," Kemp said. "Cut the crap," Fenwick said. "Tell us what really happened." "I told the truth on Tuesday." "My God, I tried to save that man's life. I pounded on his chest, put my lips to his to try and breathe life into him. Turner said, "We've been told your rivalry was a great deal more than what you led us to believe. We need to clear that up." "Who's been talking?" The cops didn't answer. "What goes on in the university should stay in the university. We have no need for outside interference." Turner said, "We'd like you to tell us what really happened between the two of you." "I suppose you've talked to half the backbiters in the department, haven't you?" Kemp said. "Jealousy is rife among those fools. We used to have a pretty laid-back department, everybody like a family, willing to go out of their way for the other. It's changed like everything else. I think it all started when they moved part of the department up to the third floor of Swift Hall years ago. They should never have separated us." "What happened between you and Gideon Giles, Mr. Kemp?" Turner asked. "All right. It was probably that Atherton Sorensen who told. I wouldn't put it past him. He's going to retire in a few years. Some of us managed to think ahead. We want to plan for an orderly succession. He doesn't like me. Thinks I'm scheming for his job." He puffed on his pipe until it went out. The detectives waited in silence. "All right, Giles was a thief. Every time I turned around, he'd be topping me. If I had an article coming out in Chaucer Monthly, he always seemed to have one the month before in the Chaucer Review. I never openly accused him of cheating, stealing my research or ideas. It'd sound like a petty departmental jealousy. For a while, it was quite a joke. He never duplicated my research, but if I'd come to a unique conclusion based on true scholarship, he seemed to have the same thing based on little more than pure whimsy. If journalists published his materials, he must have had research to support his conclusions," Turner said. Kemp pointed the stem of his pipe at Turner. "You make an interesting point. Yes, his research was there, but where did he get it? Did he steal it from some graduate student? That's been known to happen. I joked with him to his face, but I knew him for the snake he was. I watched him like a hawk. After you people went through his papers, someone in the department called Mrs. Giles to see if she wanted them. She didn't. So I volunteered to go through them. I found what I was looking for. Proof that the rat had been cheating for years." "You didn't find this out for sure until after the murder?" Fenwick asked. "Right, but I knew him well for the conniver he was. For a while, I thought he was trying to undermine me in departmental meetings. Always seemed to take the opposite side from me. I was too smart for him. I began waiting until he had made his position clear. Then I'd make my move." "Isn't this all just a little overdramatic?" Fenwick asked. "This is only a university. I thought you guys were supposed to be reading books, studying, educating, all that." Kemp chose not to condescend to Fenwick. He put his pipe aside, rubbed his right index finger on his nose. "I've been thinking about this since the murder. I'm afraid you're more than right. Being a university professor should be one of the most delightful jobs on earth. Some of us make it into a vicious, gossiping society. We've got to change." They asked him about Laura Giles, but he'd only met her at faculty functions, and they had spoken little more than beyond what was polite. They talked for a while longer. They couldn't get Kemp to go beyond his admission that the rivalry between him and Giles had been intense. It was after 11 at Area 10 headquarters. They turned in the unmarked car. Turner found stacks of paperwork and 2 messages on his desk. The top note was from Ian. He had set up a meeting with the heads of numerous liberal groups for noon the next day. The bottom one was from Clark Burke. He tossed it among the mounds of paper on his desk. He could fuss with the love-struck 19-year-old tomorrow. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.